It was supposed to be Christmas, a time when families gather, share warmth, and remind one another of love. But that morning left me colder than the snow outside my window. I stood there, watching from the kitchen, as my son Ryan placed a shining red bow on top of a brand new luxury car. He looked so proud, his eyes glowing as he handed the keys to Valerie, the woman who had only been in his life for less than a year, yet somehow became mom to him. Valerie squealed with delight, clutching Brooke's arm as though she'd won the lottery. They laughed together, admiring the car as if it was the greatest gift anyone had ever given. And maybe it was. A gift worth more than $6,000, a symbol of devotion and honor. A symbol I thought, after raising Ryan for 35 years, would have been meant for me. Instead, Ryan walked back into the house, carrying a small box for me. My heart raced, not because I expected something lavish, but because I hoped that he had remembered the years of sacrifice. The nights I stayed up working extra shifts, the pennies I stretched to pay for his college tuition, the prayers I whispered when his father passed. Maybe, I thought, he wanted to show that those sacrifices mattered. But when I opened the box, I found a tiny plastic piggy bank. Inside were 3 lonely dollar bills. Ryan said it was symbolic, that I'd always been good at saving money. My smile froze as I held that piggy bank in my hands. Symbolic? Yes. Symbolic of how invisible I had become to my own son. Symbolic of how little value my role as his mother now seemed to carry. In that moment, standing with my heart breaking and my hands trembling around a $3 gift, I couldn't help but wonder, how did it come to this? How did the woman who carried him, raised him, gave him everything, become worth less than a stranger with polished nails and a rehearsed smile? And that question would haunt me as the day unfolded. I remember when Ryan was small, no more than 5 years old, how he would run into my arms after preschool with paint still on his hands. He'd press those messy little palms against my cheeks and say that I was his whole world. Back then, I truly believed that no matter what struggles we faced, love would always hold us together. Life wasn't easy. Jack and I both worked long hours, trading shifts just so one of us could be home with Ryan. I picked up overtime at the clinic, sometimes working until 22 or and coming home exhausted, but still managing to pack lunches for the next day. Jack, steady as ever, would take weekend jobs in construction to make sure the bills were paid. We didn't have much, but we built a life filled with warmth and small joys. Every Christmas, even when we had so little, we made sure Ryan felt like the most special boy in the world. His smile made the sacrifices worth it. When Jack passed, a piece of me died with him. Suddenly, the responsibility was mine alone. I carried the weight gladly because Ryan was all I had left. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, emptied savings all so he could finish college without debt. I remember crying quietly in the kitchen, staring at tuition bills, but reminding myself it would all be worth it when Ryan walked across that stage. And when he did, when he tossed his graduation cap in the air, I thought every sleepless night, every sacrifice, had meaning. But lately, it feels like all of that love and effort disappeared from his memory. Valerie came into his life less than a year ago, but she quickly slipped into a place that once belonged only to me. I noticed it in the little things first. Ryan stopped calling me Mom with warmth. It became routine, almost dismissive. At dinners, Valerie would sit beside him while I was pushed to the far end of the table, my voice drowned out by her chatter. If I offered advice, it was brushed aside with polite smiles, as though I was an outdated relic. One Thanksgiving, I spent hours preparing Ryan's favorite dishes recipes Jack and I perfected together. Valerie arrived with a store-bought pie, and suddenly it was the highlight of the evening. Everyone gathered around her, praising how thoughtful she was. My food, my effort, barely got a mention. I sat there quietly, swallowing the ache in my chest, telling myself it didn't matter. But deep down, it did. I started to feel like a guest in my own family, like I had been slowly replaced. The worst part wasn't the neglect, it was the realization that Ryan allowed it. He didn't defend me. He didn't even seem to notice. That Christmas morning with the piggy bank was not the first betrayal. It was just the loudest confirmation of something I had been sensing for months. I was fading into the background of my son's life, while someone else stepped into the center, and it broke something inside me. It didn't take long for me to realize that Valerie's presence in Ryan's life wasn't just about companionship. She had a way of weaving herself into every decision, especially the ones that mattered most. At first, I brushed it off as the natural influence of someone new and charming. But soon, the signs became impossible to ignore. Ryan began speaking less about his own thoughts and more about what Valerie thought. When we discussed even small family matters, her opinion overshadowed mine. She positioned herself not just as Ryan's partner, but as the authority in the room. And what unsettled me most was how quickly Brooke mirrored that shift, siding with Valerie as if they had formed an alliance. I went from being a mother, whose guidance once carried weight, to an afterthought, consulted only for courtesy. The shift became sharper when money entered the picture. I overheard Valerie asking about Ryan's savings and retirement plans. Her tone laced with curiosity that felt far too pointed. She'd glance at me during those conversations, with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, as if daring me to object. Ryan, who used to discuss finances openly with me, now brushed off my questions. "We're fine, Mom," he would say, quickly changing the subject. But I noticed the changes in their lifestyle. Suddenly, there were weekend getaways, designer clothes, new furniture delivered to their home. They spoke casually about dinners at upscale restaurants, while I sat in my small kitchen counting coupons, stretching my modest pension to cover bills. I tried not to envy them. I had never been someone who cared much for material things, but the contrast between their indulgence and my humiliation gnawed at me. What truly unsettled me was the paperwork. One evening, after hosting them for dinner, I found a folder left behind on the side table. Inside were financial documents with Ryan's name, but Valerie's handwriting filled the margins with notes and instructions. She was guiding, even directing, decisions that had once been Ryan's alone. My hands trembled as I leafed through the pages, a sense of unease rising in my chest. Why was she so invested in accounts that weren't hers? I also began noticing whispers between Ryan and Valerie, hushed tones that ended the moment I entered the room. Brooke would avoid my eyes afterward, fiddling with her phone, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. And though they tried to hide it, the guilt was written across their faces. The hardest part was realizing how complicit Ryan had become. I wanted to believe my son was simply blinded, too trusting, perhaps too desperate to please, but the deeper Valerie dug her claws into our lives, the clearer it became that Ryan wasn't just being influenced, he was cooperating. I started to wonder if the love I had poured into him all these years had left him unable to resist someone who promised an easier, shinier version of life. Still, there were moments when I caught Valerie watching me, her gaze sharp, calculating, as if she knew exactly how fragile my place in Ryan's life had become. That look chilled me more than words ever could. I told myself it was paranoia, but deep down, I knew something more than neglect was happening. Something bigger, darker, and deliberate. And it was only a matter of time before I found out what it was. It was late one evening when I stumbled upon the truth I had been dreading. I was tidying the living room after Ryan and Valerie left in a rush, their laughter still echoing faintly in my ears, when I noticed a manila envelope wedged between the couch cushions. My first instinct was to leave it untouched, to tell myself it was none of my business. But something inside me, a quiet voice I couldn't ignore, urged me to look. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were legal documents bearing my name. At first glance, they looked official, complete with signatures and seals. But as my eyes scanned the page, my stomach dropped. According to these papers, I had supposedly granted Ryan power of attorney over my finances and property. My own signature sat neatly at the bottom, but I knew instantly it wasn't mine. The strokes were close, frighteningly close, but not the same. My hands shook as I traced the letters. Whoever had forged this knew what they were doing. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. Shock washed over me, followed quickly by something colder, harder. Until that moment, I had clung to the hope that Valerie's influence was just manipulation, that Ryan was simply blind with love. But this was proof of deliberate exploitation. Someone wasn't just nudging Ryan in the wrong direction. They were actively laying the groundwork to strip me of everything I had built. I thought of Jack then, of the home we had poured our lives into, the years of sacrifice, the security I had promised myself I would keep safe for as long as I lived. And now, in a folder left behind carelessly, I saw how close I was to losing it all. But instead of collapsing into despair, something unexpected stirred inside me, a spark of clarity. For the first time in months, I felt my spine straighten, my pulse steady. They thought I was weak, that I would smile politely, swallow my hurt, and fade quietly into the background. But they were wrong. I slipped the envelope back exactly where I had found it, my expression calm when Ryan returned later to pick it up. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because now, I wasn't just a grieving mother on the outside of her son's life. I was an observer. And for the first time, I was ready to play their game. The days that followed blurred into one long ache. I noticed how quickly Ryan and Brooke began to pull away from me, as though my very presence had become inconvenient. Phone calls grew shorter, sometimes ignored entirely. When they did visit, Valerie was always the one speaking, her words laced with sugar but heavy with authority. Ryan barely looked at me anymore. Brooke's smile felt rehearsed, her eyes darting to Valerie before she said anything at all. It wasn't just neglect, now it was control. Every time I raised a concern, I was made to feel unreasonable. If I asked about the sudden appraisal of my house, Ryan would tell me I was confused. If I mentioned the financial documents I thought I'd seen, Valerie would laugh lightly, assuring me I must have misread. Even Brooke chimed in, saying stress could make memories unreliable. Their voices blended into a chorus of dismissal, and slowly, I began to wonder if perhaps I was the one losing grip. The loneliness weighed heavier than any words could describe. The house that once held laughter and warmth now echoed with silence. I would walk past Jack's old recliner, the indentation of his presence still visible, and feel the sharp sting of his absence. At night, I lay awake, asking the ceiling questions that had no answers. How could my own child turn against me? Was I truly so forgettable? So replaceable? One evening, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the little pink piggy bank Ryan had given me. I shook it gently, and the 3 crumpled bills inside rustled like dry leaves. That sound hollowed me out. It was more than just money. It was a message, a reminder of what I had become in their eyes: small, disposable, symbolic only of what they wanted me to be. My vision blurred with tears, and I pressed the cheap plastic against my chest, wishing it could anchor me to something real. For the first time, I felt truly invisible, not just overlooked, but erased. My sacrifices, my love, my years of devotion, none of it seemed to matter anymore. And in that quiet moment, with only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock Jack had adored, despair washed over me like a tide I couldn't fight. I thought I had lost everything: my family's love, my dignity, my place in their lives. But just as I reached the depth of that darkness, something inside whispered that there had to be more, that this story wasn't finished yet. For a while, I let myself drown in the loneliness, convinced that I had been erased. But fate has a strange way of showing up when you least expect it. One morning, as I sorted through the week's mail, I noticed an envelope addressed to me but slipped open, as though someone else had already taken a look. My heart quickened. Inside were bank statements, but not from my account. These were tied to Ryan and Brooke records that didn't match the story they had been telling me. At first, I scanned them with confusion, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Their income hadn't changed, yet there were large withdrawals, payments I didn't recognize, and then, buried among the transactions, I saw at my house listed in an appraisal entry, connected to paperwork filed without my knowledge. It confirmed my worst fear: someone had forged authorization, likely using my name, to begin moving my assets into their reach. But there was something else. A note scribbled in Valerie's handwriting in the margin of one page. Finalized before deadline, investment group waiting. My stomach twisted. An investment group. Suddenly, all of Valerie's casual mentions of knowing people, of having opportunities, clicked into place. She wasn't just replacing me emotionally, she was orchestrating a con that could strip me of everything I had worked for. And yet, instead of despair, I felt an unexpected steadiness settle over me. This was no longer about heartbreak alone. This was about survival, about reclaiming the strength I thought I had lost. I gathered every piece of mail, every scrap of evidence I could find. I took photos, scanned documents, and stored them away carefully. For weeks, I had been their pawn, dismissed and silenced. But now, I understood the game, and I was ready to play. They believed I was weak, too blinded by grief to see clearly. They underestimated me. That was their mistake. As I tucked the statements into a folder and locked it in my desk drawer, I felt Jack's presence steadying me, reminding me of the grit we had always shared. I wasn't going to let them take the home we built, the life we fought for. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And soon, they would learn just how dangerous it is to underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. The day finally came when I decided enough was enough. I invited Ryan, Brooke, and Valerie over under the pretense of a family dinner. The table was set just as it had been for so many holidays. But this time, There was no warmth in the air, only a steady, quiet resolve inside me. They sat across from me, smiling politely, pretending as though nothing was wrong. Valerie carried herself with that same smug composure, confident that she had everything under control. Ryan avoided my eyes, while Brooke shifted nervously in her chair. I didn't waste time. I slid the folder of documents onto the table, my hands steady, my voice calm. I spoke of the forged power of attorney, the unauthorized appraisal, the mysterious withdrawals. I laid out every piece of evidence I had collected, each page landing with the weight of undeniable truth. Ryan's face drained of color. Brooke's eyes widened, and for the first time, Valerie faltered. She tried to laugh, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, but the proof spoke louder than her rehearsed charm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for recognition. I simply stated the facts, one after another, until the silence in the room became unbearable. For months, they had treated me as though I was invisible, powerless. But at that table, it was clear who held the strength. When I told them the authorities would be receiving copies of the documents, Valerie's mask finally cracked. Her hands trembled. Ryan buried his face in his palms, the weight of his choices crashing down. Brooke whispered apologies through tears. Justice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and absolute. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Looking back now, I realized that betrayal, as painful as it was, became the mirror I needed. It forced me to see not just the cruelty of others, but the strength still living within me. For so long, I believed my worth depended on recognition, on being needed. But this experience taught me something different. True worth doesn't come from gifts or approval. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away. I lost illusions. Yes, but I gained clarity. I understood that money and possessions can vanish, but respect and love, when they are real, can never be bought or faked. I learned that dignity is not something anyone can hand you or strip from you. It's something you claim, even when standing alone. And perhaps most importantly, I discovered that resilience can grow from the deepest wounds. I found my voice again. I found the courage to protect what Jack and I built, not just for me, but for the memory of the love that carried us through all those years. So if you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or betrayed, know this: you are stronger than you think, and your story isn't over. Thank you for listening to mine. If it touched you, I'd be grateful if you liked this video, shared it with someone who needs to hear it, and left a comment with your own story. Because every voice matters, and sometimes sharing is the first step toward healing.